Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. We've got a really fascinating set of sources to go through this time.
Yeah, really interesting stuff.
All focusing on that incredibly tumultuous period, right after the Qin Dynasty crumbled.
Right after the Qin, yeah.
I want you to reflect on whether Xiang Yu, despite his undeniable military brilliance,
Right.
what alternative decisions
What could he have done differently?
could he have made in these early days?
Yeah.
And what might the potential long-term outcomes have been?
Some good questions to think about.
I think our mission today is to really get under the skin of this historical turning point
Yeah.
by looking at the immediate aftermath, through the actions of some key figures.
Okay.
And I'm thinking particularly Liu Bang and the really imposing figure of Xiang Yu.
Oh yeah, he's a big one.
So we really want to try to understand, the power shifts, pivotal decisions that were made as a new order, or really maybe a state of near chaos, order of emerged.
That's what we're going to be looking at, right? Is how
Yeah.
how do you build something, or how do you try to build something
Right.
out of the wreckage of what was there before?
Yeah, and that's what's so fascinating about this period, right?
Absolutely.
It's just brimming with ambition and deep-seated resentments and that fundamental struggle
It is.
to build something new
Yeah.
from the wreckage of the old.
And it's really amazing, too, when you
Mhm.
look at it, how the choices that these individuals make,
Yeah.
sometimes seemingly small choices, have these massive ripple effects later on.
Yeah, so let's get our bearings.
Okay.
Let's set the scene. Right after the feast at Hongmen.
The feast at Hongmen.
Okay, and this wasn't just, a friendly get-together.
No.
This was a real turning point.
It was.
I think Liu Bang's strategic submission to Xiang Yu
Right.
essentially pulled the rug out from under his independent command.
It really did.
You remember, the 3 laws that he sort of set up in Guanzong?
Right.
That was so welcomed by the Qin people.
Right.
Well, those instantly became meaningless, right?
Yeah, pretty
It's a
much.
huge power shift.
Yeah, I mean, the initial hope
And the initial hope,
for a more stable future under Liu Bang.
yeah, for the Qin people at least,
Especially for the Qin people.
just vanished, pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, really the key contrast here is how quickly the Qin population becomes disillusioned.
Right.
I mean, they had that very brief taste
Yeah.
of a less oppressive regime under Liu Bang,
Right.
and then bang, they get Xiang Yu.
Yeah, and that really sets the stage for everything that follows.
It really does, yeah.
So Xiang Yu's arrival in Xianyang was anything but peaceful.
Yeah. I mean, this is
The sources we have paint a really brutal picture.
brutal, yeah, that's the word.
We're talking about a full-scale massacre,
Yeah.
the execution of Prince Zong,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
the surrendered Qin ruler, let's not
Right.
forget,
Yeah, we can't forget about that.
and then the deliberate burning of the Qin palaces.
Yeah, I mean, the real
The sources are clear that this was Xianyang Palace that was destroyed.
Xianyang Palace, right?
The flames raged for a full 3 months.
3 months. That's a long time.
It wasn't Yiping Palace, which was still unfinished.
Right.
But, that kind of destruction in the capital,
Well, that's the thing.
it must have felt like just such a profound betrayal to the Qin people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think if we consider the larger implications of that,
Yeah.
it's that Xiang Yu, basically, by doing that,
Yep.
sabotages any chance he has
Yeah.
of gaining any real traction, any real support.
In Guanzong, yeah.
In Guanzong, exactly.
And that relief they felt under Liu Bang, however short-lived,
However short-lived.
it's just obliterated by this wave of violence.
Completely gone. Yeah.
So it really shifts the narrative from potential liberation
yeah.
to utter disillusionment.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
And the fallout from that fire, it wasn't just, the immediate physical damage. One aspect that really stands out to me
Okay.
is the destruction of the Qin doctoral officials' book collection.
Oh, right.
We know that Qin Shi Huang's initial book burning was targeted at private holdings.
Private holdings, right.
But this fire took out the imperial library, which was in the care of these officials.
Right.
And it held just a vast amount of traditional knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully,
Thankfully, Xiao,
here,
grabbed the maps and the population records and the legal codes.
right.
But this fire still wiped out, this massive chunk of traditional culture.
Yeah, and I think what's crucial to point out here is that this event essentially created what's some sources refer to as a cultural wasteland in the early Han Dynasty.
Right.
So it's not just Qin Shi Huang, it's this second wave
Right.
that's aimed at these imperial archives.
Right.
So it's historical records, philosophical thought.
That's a huge loss.
Huge loss, and you can only imagine what the long-term impact of that is.
Yeah. Yeah. It really lays the groundwork for that intellectual recovery that had
Yeah.
to happen later on.
Yep.
Now, speaking of pivotal decisions, there's that anecdote about Han Sheng
Yeah, okay.
advising Xiang Yu to establish his capital in Guanzhong.
Yeah, in Guanzhong.
Strategically, it makes so much sense.
Natural defenses.
Fertile
It
lands.
makes sense.
But Xiang Yu's response,
What does he say?
wearing embroidered robes at night,
Oh, right.
that really speaks volume
It does. It does. It suggests a certain
about his priorities.
immaturity about
Yeah.
what it takes to maintain power long term.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, he basically wants to go back and show off.
Right.
And Han Sheng's retort is great.
Yeah. What does he say?
He says the Chu people are monkeys wearing hats.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's it's a deeply derogatory idiom.
Yeah.
That's really rooted in regional prejudice.
Yeah. So the sources tell us that this isn't just
It's not just the physical.
a physical jab, right?
Right, because it implies that the Chu people are physically small, monkey-like. Right.
But it's also this cultural jab.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
unsophisticated.
Right.
So you can imagine how Xiang Yu,
Yeah.
even if he could brush off a personal insult,
Right.
he's not going to brush off an attack on his entire people.
So he has Han Sheng boiled alive.
That's right.
And that's where we get the saying, a monkey wearing a hat.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
From this very incident.
So this really underscores, I think, this incident.
It does.
Xiang Yu's impulsiveness.
Impulsiveness, yeah.
And this inability to prioritize strategic thinking
Strategic thinking.
over his own personal feelings.
And regional bias.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a real flaw
Yeah.
in his leadership, in his makeup.
Right.
It's just this blind spot, basically.
And the sources also dig deeper into why he rejected Guanzhong.
Okay.
Right. And the Shan massacre
Xian massacre.
of those 200,000 surrendered Qin soldiers.
Surrendered soldiers is absolutely central to that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, this wasn't just a battle.
This is an execution.
It was a mass execution.
of soldiers who had already laid down their arms.
How could he have possibly expected
Right.
to be welcomed in Guangzhou
Yeah, how could he?
after such an act?
And I think this raises a really important point
Okay.
about the nature of animosity.
Right.
Because the Xin'an massacre transforms
Right.
what was maybe a general national hatred of Qin
Right.
into a very personal vendetta
Right.
for the people of Guangzhou.
Yeah.
It's not about Qin versus Chu anymore. It's about the lives of their relatives,
Right.
people who had surrendered under the promise of safety
Right.
and were brutally murdered.
Yeah.
So it makes it impossible
Right.
for Xiang Yu to gain any kind of genuine support there.
Right. And his reasoning for allowing his troops to loot and burn Xin'an
Oh, yeah.
also kind of ties into this, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Because he seemed to view Guangdong as this territory.
Right.
He wouldn't hold long term.
Like he was just passing through.
Right. Whether it went to Han as initially promised
Actually promised, right?
or to Liu Bang based on the agreement with King Huai.
The agreement.
He's thinking, well, why not let the troops
Yeah, why not?
unleash this pent-up hatred for Qin?
Yeah, get it all out.
Exploit the land.
That's a brutal calculation.
It's brutal. It's almost cynical.
Cynical, but maybe understandable from his point of view.
Right.
I mean, in a twisted way, obviously.
Yeah, but it highlights a real lack of strategic foresight.
It does, because...
While it might have temporarily appeased the troops,
Right.
it further alienated the very population whose territory he was occupying.
Absolutely.
So it's a classic example of prioritizing short-term gains
Short-term gains.
at the expense of...
Long-term stability.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, let's shift to this crucial issue of legitimacy.
Okay.
In the post-Qin era,
Post-Qin, yeah.
Xiang Yu's title, Supreme General of the Feudal Lords.
Right.
That was always temporary.
So wartime position, yeah.
Wartime position, right?
Right.
So Qin's gone.
Right.
The big question now is,
Who's in charge?
who holds the rightful authority?
Right.
The sources touch upon this idea of restoring the old six states.
Yeah. Go back to the old ways.
Right. And perhaps elevating the king of Chu.
Right.
But, as you pointed out, the power dynamics on the ground
Had
had shifted so dramatically.
They're completely different.
This was largely wishful thinking.
Yeah, and it's fascinating
Right.
how we see this sort of disconnect
Yeah.
between the old ideals of legitimacy
Right.
and the new realities of power.
Right.
Right? So restoring the Pre-Qin order might have seemed logical in theory,
Right. Right.
but Xiang Yu's military strength, his prestige,
Right.
it changed the political landscape so much
Right.
that just going back to the past is untenable.
Right. And when he sought direction from King Huai of Chu,
King Guan, yeah.
the king's simple reply, as agreed,
As agreed, yeah.
referring to that earlier promise of Guansong
Right.
to whoever enters it first.
Yeah.
It really created a major problem for Xiang Yu, didn't it?
Well, yeah, because on the surface, it
Oh.
seems like a very straightforward instruction, right?
Right.
You know, you made an agreement, you should honor it.
Right. But from Xiang Yu's viewpoint.
Right. But if you look at it from his side,
Yeah.
that agreement really unfairly favors Liu Bang,
Right.
who, while he did enter Guanzong first,
Right.
hadn't been the one to confront the main Qin armies to the same degree as Xiang Yu had.
Right.
So Xiang Yu, who rightly sees himself as the primary reason for the Qin defeat,
Right.
this feels really unjust to him.
Yeah.
So it's a missed opportunity, I think, for King Huai
Yeah.
to exercise some political savvy,
Right.
to recognize Xiang Yu's power, and maybe come up with a more nuanced solution.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And instead, Xiang Yu's angry response
Right.
directly questions King Huai's legitimacy.
Yeah.
You know, emphasizing his own military contribution.
And the effort of the other general.
Right.
Yeah.
He's essentially arguing, I'm the one who delivered the victory.
I'm the one.
My merit should be the basis for authority.
Exactly.
So this is a real turning point, I think. It's
Yeah.
a decisive shift away from traditional
Right.
lineage-based legitimacy
Right.
towards a system based on power
Power.
and perceived merit.
And merit.
Yeah.
And I think this is a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
Because by redefining legitimacy based on strength and contribution,
Right.
this sets the stage for a whole new way of dividing the empire.
Right.
It's a direct challenge to the old order,
Yeah.
and it places the entire responsibility for creating this new stable system
On Xiang Yu's shoulders.
yes, squarely on his shoulders, yeah.
So what was his answer to this King Huai issue?
Well, what he does
Yeah.
is he nominally honors him as the righteous emperor
Right.
or Yidi
Right.
and relocates him far to the south.
Right. So that title, Righteous Emperor,
Righteous emperor.
the sources tell us, has multiple layers of interpretation.
Right.
It could suggest a form of collective endorsement.
Right, that everyone's behind him.
Right.
You know, that he has this broad support.
Right. But there's also this strong sense, as some historians argue,
Yes.
that
this emperor
Right.
doesn't really have any authority.
Right.
And that's a crucial point of debate here,
yeah.
is that while some accounts might present it as a title that was conferred, you know, by the collective will of all the lords,
Right.
the language in other key historical texts, notably the records of the Grand Historian
Right.
and the Book of Han, really suggests that it was more of a superficial gesture.
Right.
So they specifically mention that Xiang Yu nominally honored him,
Right.
but largely disregarded his directives.
Right.
So that really points to this lack of genuine power.
So it really sounds like a calculated move by Xiang Yu
A calculated move. Yeah.
to give the appearance of respecting this supreme ruler.
Yeah, look, we have an emperor,
Right.
but he's not really doing anything.
Right.
And I'm really in charge.
Right. So having dealt with King Huai, or the righteous emperor,
The righteous emperor.
he then faced this incredibly complex task
Yeah.
of rewarding
Rewarding ever.
those who had participated in the anti-Qin campaign.
All the people that helped him get to this point.
And the sources make it clear that this was far
Oh, yeah.
from a straightforward process
You can't just hand out titles.
of handing out titles, right?
No,
Yeah.
it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah.
I mean, the theoretical ideal of rewarding people purely based on merit, right, quickly runs into the messy reality of personal alliances, of
Right.
pre-existing loyalties, and just the sheer number of leaders
From the former six states.
from the former 6 states, right?
Yeah. Who had managed to survive the conflict.
Right.
And that's a key factor, I think.
That's huge.
The fact that so many of the old guard did survive.
Well, right, because unlike some of the earlier uprisings
Right.
where lots of the leaders perished.
Right.
This time, a lot of them are still around.
Yeah.
So that makes dividing the territory and titles so much more complicated.
And by breaking with tradition,
right,
and opting to redistribute based on his own definition of merit,
right,
he essentially took on this immense challenge.
He did, yeah.
Of creating an entirely new social and political hierarchy.
So he's not just going with the established system where lineage dictates status.
Right, yeah.
He's basically putting the entire weight of establishing a stable post-war order
on his own shoulders.
On his judgment, on his decisions.
And that's a huge undertaking.
It's enormous.
Yeah, yeah. And the sources highlight 3 particularly contentious enfeastments.
All right, let's hear them.
Nanpi, Qi, and Guanzong.
Nanpi, Qi, and Guansong.
Let's begin with Nanpi.
Okay.
And the case of Xiang Yu.
Xiang Yu.
He had that falling out with Zong
right.
during the Battle of Julu.
During the Battle of Julu.
And wasn't even part of the initial push into Guanzong.
So he's not really there at the key moment.
Right.
At the end.
So by Xiang Yu's apparent criteria, he didn't really qualify for any significant reward.
Right.
Yet he ended up with 3 counties in Nanpi.
3 counties.
What's the story there?
Well, this really underscores the influence of personal connections because Xiang Yu, even though he and Zong had this big falling out, Xiang Yu was a very highly respected scholar. And he had some very influential friends in Xiang Yu's circle. And they actively lobbied on his behalf. So it appears that Xiang Yu, to maybe appease these people, reluctantly granted Xiang Yu this relatively small territory. But it's still something.
But Xiang Yu likely felt deeply slighted by this.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I mean, Zhang was made a king.
Yeah.
He gets 3 counties.
Yeah, not even close.
And it's that direct comparison.
Exactly.
With someone he considered a peer. With whom he had a prior conflict.
It's like adding insult to injury.
Right.
You know, he really feels the sting of that.
And the argument is made that if Xiang Yu had given him nothing, his resentment might have been solely directed at Zong heir.
Yeah.
But by giving him a little,
right,
he created this clear point of comparison.
Fun point of comparison.
And potentially sowed the seeds of future conflict.
Yeah, with Xiang Yu himself.
With Xiang Yu,
yeah,
right? So it's a perfect illustration of how a seemingly
conciliatory
gesture can really backfire.
Yeah, yeah.
If it breeds a sense of injustice or inferiority.
In the recipient.
In the recipient, yeah. Now let's move to the incredibly messy situation in Qi.
Okay, Qi, yeah.
We had those initial uprisings led by Tian Dan,
right?
Followed by this whole series of power struggles.
Oh, yeah.
Involving Tianrong, Tianjia, Tianxi.
Yeah, it's a lot of Tians.
It's a lot of Tians, right?
It is.
It's a real tangle. Of shifting loyalties. And betrayals. Tianrong, notably, had refused to aid
Gang, right?
Earlier in the conflict.
Earlier on.
And seemed pretty indifferent.
Yeah, he didn't really care too much.
During that crucial siege of Julu.
Right.
So how did Xiang Yu attempt to resolve this volatile situation?
So Xiang Yu's approach to Qi is divisive. Yeah. And ultimately counterproductive.
Right.
So he relocates the current king, Tianxi, and installs Tian Du, who had actually provided some assistance to Xiang Yu at Julu, as the new king of Qi, and then creates a separate kingdom of Jibei for Tianan, who had also surrendered to him at Julu. So the critical point here is the complete exclusion
of Tian,
of Tianrong
from this arrangement.
From this whole thing. Yeah.
So Qi, which had largely been under his control, is now carved up into 3 separate entities.
3 separate kingdoms,
with his rivals elevated to positions of power.
And he's left with nothing.
Yeah. So given his history, given his strong personality.
Oh, yeah.
It's hardly surprising that the sources highlight this profound resentment on his part.
He's not happy at all.
He viewed those appointed by Xiang Yu as nothing more than traitors.
Traitors to Qi.
Right.
And rightly so from his perspective. You know, Xiang Yu's this outsider general from Chu. What right does he have?
To interfere in the internal affairs of Qi.
To interfere, exactly. And especially
to elevate individuals he considers disloyal?
Yeah, these are his enemies, basically.
Right. So this creates this fundamental clash of legitimacy.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it essentially guarantees
Future conflict.
open conflict
Yeah.
in the region. In the region, yeah.
Yeah.
So we've seen these sparks of discontent,
Okay.
ignited in Nanpi.
Yeah.
And outright exclusion and division in Qi.
Right.
And as we begin to wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
the sources strongly suggest that while these were significant problems, it was the way Xiang Yu handled the enfeoffment of Guanzong itself
Guanzong, okay.
that would ultimately prove to be the critical catalyst.
The catalyst.
For his downfall.
His downfall, okay.
So it really sets the stage.
It does.
For the next
even more dramatic.
Even more dramatic chapter of this story.
Oh, can't wait to get into it.
Yeah.
So we've got Xiang Yu's decisions regarding Guanzong.
Right.
They're going to prove to be the breaking point.
Yeah.
And they're going to ignite the final decisive conflict.
Yeah.
That's going to determine the fate of the post-Qin world.
So to quickly recap what we've explored today.
Okay.
We examine Xiang Yu's brutal actions in Xianyang.
Right.
The resulting cultural losses.
Right.
His strategic misstep in rejecting Guanzong as his capital.
Right.
The shaky attempt to establish legitimacy through the righteous emperor.
Right.
And the disastrous consequences of the enfeoffment.
Yeah.
And Nanpi and Qi.
Yeah.
Particularly the simmering resentments of figures like Chen Yu and Tian Rong.
And I think stepping back and looking at the bigger picture,
yeah,
you can see how the challenge of establishing a new order after such a huge upheaval are just immense. I mean, you have this intricate dance of rewarding merit, of balancing competing interests, and then the powerful impact of personal grievances and strategic miscalculations. They all come together to shape this turbulent landscape of this post-Qin era.
Yeah, it really makes you consider the incredible pressures.
The pressures.
And the often seemingly impossible choices.
Yeah, the choices.
These leaders face.
They faced, yeah.
So for you to think about,
I
want you to reflect on whether Xiang Yu, despite his undeniable military brilliance, fundamentally lacked the political acumen.
Political skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Necessary to consolidate his power.
Consolidate, right.
And build a lasting peace.
Okay.
What alternative decisions?
What could he have done differently?
Could he have made in these early days?
Yeah.
And what might the potential long-term outcomes have been?
Some good questions to think about.
Yeah. So that's your deep dive.
Your deep dive.
To contemplate until our next session.
I'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks for joining us.